Welcome. My name's Adam, the executive chef here at Susan Gage Caterers. As we're all excited to get back traveling again, we want to take you on this alpine adventure cooking through one of Switzerland's most famous dishes. For the last 10 years, we've been working with the Swiss Embassy to produce one of the most exciting events of the season, one of our favorites here, the Soirée Suisse. In that time, we have learned a lot about Swiss cooking. We're excited to be able to share some of that with you today. Imagine those outpourings blowing in the background and come join me in the kitchen while we put this together. If your kitchen doesn't look exactly like this one does, don't worry. We're going to give you all the tips and tricks so that you can do this at home. So over the last 10 years, working on this event, there's one recipe that has stood head and shoulders above the rest. That's Zürcher Geschnetzeltes. I might not be saying that perfectly, but this recipe is pretty close to it. And we've served thousands of portions, always a favorite. So this recipe has a handful of ingredients, and like most recipes that have stood the test of time with only a few ingredients, there are a myriad of ways to not make this right. So we're going to go through, explain a little bit about how to put it together and why, and show how easy it is. So we're going to start with our veal breast. So we butchered this from the whole breast. You could probably have your butcher, someone do this before. The key element is to cut with the grain, big slices, then across the grain to give yourself these small strips. You know, really the texture comes with that butchery. Everything kind of starts there. So you have a dredge of flour that we're going to mix it with before we fry it. Some people will season the flour. You know, I find that you lose a lot of that in the frying process, and your pepper is going to get bitter. So we're going to season the meat itself. Just a little salt, a little pepper. So we're going to add in our flour, just AP flour with a dash of cornstarch. It's going to give a little bit of crispiness to it and also give a nice texture to the sauce when we finish it up. So, floured lightly, seasoned well. Just going to lay it in the pan. Now you want to cook this around 350 degrees, and you want to use an oil that has a high smoke point. Canola, grapeseed, vegetable oil in a pinch. It's going to allow you to get a good crisp finish and not overcook the veal itself, which is already tender. And you're just looking for the browning in the meat. Now, if you're cooking for a large amount of people in a smaller pan at home, you want to make sure that you don't overcrowd the pan. You're able to keep that heat up and do it in batches if you have to. So we're looking for a dark brown color on this. The importance in that is to take the flour, cook the starch out of it. That browning process adds a lot of the flavor, and that flavor is going to come out later in the sauce. So every element just building on itself is important. So take your time with this. Make sure you get the color on it. Once you get it going, I'm going to add a bay leaf and a little bit of thyme. All right. And that's looking good. We're going to finish it with a little bit of butter. This butter's going to get dark quickly, so we want to add a generous amount. And we're going to strain off a lot of the extra fat here. What we're looking for is the butter solids to brown toast, get that nutty fragrant, and that's also going to stick to the flour, that cornstarch, all of that building to itself. So we're going to take this, just rest it on this small little trivet with a paper towel to allow us to drain off all of that fat, because you're not looking for an oily dish, you're looking for one that's rich. We're going to lose the majority of that fat and that oil, but we still have the butter solids, that toasted flour, that fond, we say, in there, more flavor, one pot meal, let's clean up. This works well for everybody. We're going to add our mushrooms. So because we had the thyme and the bay in there for just a short amount of time, we're going to add it back to this. There's still more flavor to get out of that. All right, so we're going to season this somewhat generously. The salt helps bring the moisture out of the mushrooms, even more so than with the veal. So these are going to cook for a little while, and while they are, a word on the veal stock, which is an essential element to this dish. So find the chicken stock or beef stock, little cartons, however you might be able to find it, locally for you. That's a fine substitute. But what you want to do then is take a teaspoon or two of cornstarch and slurry that into some of the stock. And when we add it later, we're going to get the same texture, that same thickness that we want that we get from the gelatin and the veal stock itself. But you're not going to miss out too much. But if you really want to go, spend some time in the kitchen, maybe if it's a cold day, veal stock warms everything up, just smells like a grandmother's hug. It's fantastic. So feel free to use that. All right, now that we have some color here, we're going to add some shallots. We don't add these in the beginning because then they'll burn and we'll get some bitterness in that. And we just want them to sweat out some. So while that's going, we're going to again add some butter. Just layers of flavor here. Now that we have the butter in, the pan's a little bit dry. Those mushrooms have soaked up that oil that was in there. We're going to add a splash of wine to this and let it deglaze as this butter browns. So we have a beautiful Swiss wine here. Keep it all together, really go with the theme. You have a nice chilled bottle. It does not matter that it cooks that way, but it allows you to drink a nice glass bottle of white wine while you're going through this process. And the whole night becomes more magical that way. So the flour we have left in the pan is already starting to thicken this. We're going to cook down the wine as the butter browns. And the fragrant part of the butter, important. More importantly here is that you smell that raw alcohol in the wine until that goes away and you just smell the butter. Otherwise the wine gives it kind of a sour flavor. What we're looking for is like that little bit of tart, a little more depth. All right, so I smell that wine's gone, a little hint of that buttery goodness. So I'm going to add our cream. So once you see that cream taking on that color of everything we've been cooking, we're going to add our stock. So again, if this is something you've bought in the store, cold, add a few, like a teaspoon, like less than you might think, a little cornstarch in there, mix that up. You're going to bring the stock up to a high simmer, even if it's the stock you made yourself, because you don't want this to go in cold. It's going to set a lot of those starches, and the time it takes to reheat everything, you might have some issues with the cream and it staying together and keeping that smooth, wonderful thing going. So this is a little warm. So this is going to cook down for a minute or two. All right, now that we see our reduction is getting to the point where the bubbles are getting bigger, all of that water in the mushrooms, the wine, everything's cooked out, really married together. That stock is blended in there just as it should be. We're going to add our veal back. Now the light breading that's on here is going to cook off for the most part, and that's by design. All those flavors, it's picked up the meat now. That only reduced for maybe 2 minutes, 2 or 3. At that point, if you've cooked this in batches, everything can go into a large pot together. You don't need a ton of heat. You're not trying to reduce anything fast now. You're just marrying it all, letting the flavors come together. We're going to finish with our parsley. The very last thing you're going to put in here, because for a dish this rich, the best thing you can add to it is a little bit of water. And you get that just in simple green chlorophyll of the parsley. It cleans things up and it gives a little bit of balance to all of the fantastic things you have here and highlights a lot of that depth and richness. So we're going to pick out our bay leaf. We're going to plate this in a very traditional way with our rosti. And things that taste this good from a part of the world where they know how to eat well in cold weather, you don't have to get too fancy. On top, a little bit of that sauce to get into the potatoes, a little potatoes outside of it to give a little bit of a crispy contrast. A little parsley to finish. And there you are. Hope you enjoy. I'm sure we will here. Thank you so much.